Chapter 2. Black in the Trees. Eastward the country huddled into itself. Villages thinned and then learned wisdom. They built themselves where roads forgot them and watched strangers with the same care with which they counted seed. The forest did the rest, shouldering sky, nursing damp, and speaking in the soft grammar of pine needles and old bark. Beds were wherever you convinced the ground to be less particular. Supper was whatever had been less quick than you. The first lesson the forest offered was teeth. Wolves took Marius's hobbled horse who had wandered just a bit too far from fire past midnight on the second day, neat and efficient as accountants who had been told to balance the ledger by dawn. Marius stood with his hands open and did not curse because the prayer that wanted to come had no god who would have deserved it. Raina's face had gone the pale of polished bone. "Take tack and pack it away," she said after the silence, voice steady because someone had to reach for steadiness first. "Ride my horse, I'll fly." Marius shook his head because Fairness wanted to argue, then nodded because Fairness had nothing to do with the forest. He fitted the tack with hands that had done such things in courtyards and learned that leather behaves differently when air tastes like iron and your throat tastes like salt. He did not speak grief aloud. The wood would have kept it for him and whispered it back wrong. Raina took the air over the trees. She went up a tree, took off clean, and then remembered, in the first astonished gust that caught her wrong, why Elisa had been a terror about landings. A forest does not care how clever your wings are. It offers you vertical consequence and branch tips the shape of knives. There is no forgiving terrace, no warm stone, no cheerful wind coming off a tower to lift you kindly into your own shadow. She practiced what she had once called tricks and recognized now as the difference between grace and a punctured lung. She learned in one morning and 3 heartbeats that a stall is not a failure, but a choice, that a side slip can be humility instead of panic, that sometimes the right place to put a foot is where the most inconvenient branch says no, and you answer with a yes small enough to be allowed. She came down twice into glades stingy with flatness, using midair shifts and rolls on the ground as human. She was full of self-loathing at first, for her mind supplied her mother's graceful shifts, with a rider no less, but in the end forgave herself for not doing it pretty because doing it at all had become the point, and someday she too would be good enough to have grace. On the 3rd day they found a clearing the forest had not intended. Trees do not fall in circles unless men tell them to or dragons do. Here, Char wrote on the ground its new plan. Trunks had black kisses up one side, needles had crisped into lace, sap had burst and painted the east faces of stones in amber spatters. The burn was not yesterday's. Moss had found its feet again, and ants had requisitioned a fallen limb. But it was not old enough to be gossip. A fortnight, perhaps. The air still held the faint tin tang of heat done arguing. They camped there because it had already been taken from the forest, and it is rude to take more than one must. Riffe set their little perimeter with the same ordinary competence she used, retrieving a slipped strap. Horses inside rope, hobbles on, bells muted with cloth. A high, smoky fire that told wolves the meat available here would be tiresome. A lean-to that would not break the line of sight to the sky. Night came the way eastern nights do, sudden and convinced. Stars tested themselves on gaps between black firs. Owls did their work and minded their own affairs. Then, without prelude, the sky ceased to be itself for a breath. A shadow crossed it, no sound, no lantern of eye flaming threat, just the great simple absence of stars in a shape that the body knows even if the mind refuses. Raina's heart went high and hot, and she sprang to her feet with no more plan than youth and a lifetime of being told that you speak first and fight only when speaking has failed. She was halfway to air when the shadow folded into the edges of night and left her staring up at a sky innocent as a lyre. "Colour?" Marius asked softly, teeth on the word. "Black," Rhianna said, frustration in it and something more, an odd, unnameable ache. Or nothing. Night makes everything look black. Rhianna's colour had still not come, and her hide remained dull grey. When Elisa spoke of it, there had been pride and the sort of warning a mother smuggles into recipes. It would not arrive because a calendar says so. For dragons, colour is the proof of finding your truth and the spring it drinks from. Green for Elisa had arrived not in youth when her body was certain it deserved everything, but later when she had joined her destiny to an abandoned boy struggling in a storm of his own making. Rhianna had learned the lesson, and then, like all good lessons, had to learn it truly by her own experience. By day she searched. They did not argue with her. Riffe kept camp in moving fashion, nothing left to trace them that would not have suited a careful deer. She hunted lean and clean, brought back meat and apologies to the trees she had asked to forgive a borrowed branch. Marius managed distance and maps that were not maps. He collected rumours from the wind the way his mother had collected truth from men who thought themselves important. Rhianna quartered the sky. She learned a new way to fly. Not high and gleeful like a child dared out of a window, not fast and showy like a summer lark, but patient as a heron. She set circles wide enough to be courteous, tight enough to be useful. When she found where the burn's edges had tasted sap the keenest, she let her own heat settle to a hum and spoke to air in syllables that do not need consonants. She found him in the hour when birds have decided they will, in fact, continue another day, and the sun has not yet remembered to be cruel. Black, yes. Not absence, but the deep gloss of wet obsidian. The kind that shows you yourself if you bring a lamp. He hung over a cut in the trees where rock had insisted on telling the forest what shape it would be. He was wrong with the wrongness of grief, not of malice. Wings jittered between beats like a heart afraid of its own arrhythmia. His head moved with the fast, quick jerks of something listening for orders it could not hear. His colour was complete and unreadable, and someone had called it into being with a truth that had broken its vessel. Rhianna made herself smaller, the way a teacher does when a frightened animal mistakes help for hunger. She set her shoulders to say they mean no harm. She used the syllables of greeting dragons reserved for those they do not intend to challenge. Workmanlike, polite, precise. The answer was fire anyway. There was no roar. There was an inhale that made her own chest answer before her mind had a vote. Heat came like a thrown pot. No artistry, all volume. She did what Elisa had taught on ugly afternoons when sky was uncooperative. She banked without pride, let the fire touch air that had not been given an excuse to be resentful, withheld her own answering blaze. She fled instead, because attack followed on the heels of fire. She took everything she could from the advantage of being smaller, lighter, faster, and able to be human when needed. Twice a branch that had no business being kind decided to be kind. She dropped into a gap of light that no architect would have given her and let gravity and her shoulders decide they were friends. She did not think about colour. She thought about not dying in a forest that could not have borne the irony. When she reached open air again enough to believe in decisions, she threw a voice instead of flame over her shoulder, a single syllable with the weight of an order in it. No. The black flinched, not hurt, startled by the shape of a word he could not remember knowing. It bought her a breath. A breath is a fortune when you spend it well. She did. She ran a glide under a ridge and around it, into the kind air behind, then down to the ground as human, running away between trees. He did not see where she went. He spat heat at a tree that had been minding its business for 212 years, and then stuttered upward. She did not go straight back. Pride wanted to. Sense suggested a long curve. She made the curve a little longer when she took off again, just in case the black had decided to resume the hunt. When she reached the camp's clearing, the fire was burning brightly as it always did when Riffe is thinking about wolves. Marius was standing with a hand flat on the horse's neck, muttering numbers under his breath. calculating something. Black, Rhianna said, landing with more dust than she liked, and less shame than she would have expected. And wild, not angry, not yet, not deliberately, but he will burn what does not get out of his way. He did not listen to my greeting. Riffe's jaw tightened. Then we teach him to listen, she said. We will need a place where the trees are on part of the lesson. And a plan, Marius added. Rhianna looked back toward the strip of sky where she had last been a small shape and someone else a larger one. She was trying to find her patience, but it was elusive. I saw his colour, she said softly, to herself as much as to the others. Mine will come when it is time. His colour has come and broken him. We will have to be careful. Hungry? Riffe asked briskly after nodding, because a full stomach makes everything easier. Very, Rhianna said, and could at last bear to smile with a little crookedness in it. And not only for dinner. The forest listened and did not care. The wolves passed by and did not apologize. Far away, something big and black that had known only despair felt something new it had no name for. The clearing held their breath with them, and the night decided it would let stars stay where they were for one more turn. Chapter 3. The Man Within. Rhianna tried kindness until kindness frayed. Morning after morning she lifted on the cool breath that rises from ground, woven tight with roots, and flew the same patient circles. She brought no challenge in her shoulders, no fire in her mouth, only the untheatrical grammar of greeting. She learned the black's patterns the way one learns a hawk's. What moves make him lift, what silences make him tilt his head. At her best approach, she slid close enough to count the seams where muscle had taught scale which way to lie. See me, she asked, not with words, not a threat, not anything you cannot bear. Just see. Sometimes he did. It was a blink more than a moment, the way a sleeper's eyes will rise to the surface and recognize a face and then, outraged at being reminded they are not whole, plunge back into dream. When she finally risked a touch, there was a shock that ran both ways. For a breath he would be not just a beast, but a person drowning in a body too loud. He flinched, always as if shame had teeth. He bolted. She would come back to camp hot with breath and colder with a stubborn grief that had not learned how to arrange itself yet. On an evening when smoke held its shape and the wolves remembered their manners, Marius set the ledger aside with more care than usual. I have a plan, he said cautiously. Rhianna made a face. A bad plan, I'm sure. This one will work, he said, and then, because he had been raised by a woman who taught accuracy as an ethic, added, in principle. Riffe, who had been checking buckles because nothing calms terror like leather that will not betray you, lifted an eyebrow. In practice, he said evenly, we will need a borrowed miracle and a few willing lunatics. You? Rhianna asked, too quick. No, the plan is mine, whatever that makes me, but it is the kind only two can do. You, he said gently, and then to Riffe, and her. He laid his plan out carefully. He's most himself right after a shock. Your touch, a nod to Rhianna, brings him to the surface. Riffe's gift does the rest. If we can change him back to a man while we're still in the air, the trees won't fight us. I'll put wind under you and a dome over him to contain the heat. You, his gaze on Rhianna, carry Riffe on your back like Elisa taught you. Get her hand on his skin and hold it there until the dragon becomes a man. Then grab him and land. I'll be below, making the ground softer. Silence counted itself out in 4 heartbeats. It is very brave, Rhianna said at last, with the word brave having a tone very close to the word stupid. It is, Marius agreed, but it is also the only path that ends in anything except burned timber and a bounty paid to someone who does not aim to rescue, only to remove. Rhianna looked at the sky. I think, her voice stepped carefully, I think he is mine. Riffe's head turned at that. Marius looked at her puzzled. Not scandal, calculation that had found a missing number. Not yet, Raina said quickly before the word could ruin anything. My colour has not come. I am not. She could not bring herself to say grown. I am not finished enough to bind or to be bound. If I am wrong about him, I will be wrong, and that is that. But regardless of what might be, the determination in her mouth tasted bitter. It would be indecent to leave him lost. Riffe's mouth made a line that would have looked like disapproval on another face. On hers, it was assent. Then we stop being decent in the polite way and practice the other kind, she said. Do not ask me not to risk it. I believe this is the thing we are meant to do. Meant, Raina echoed, tasting a word that could rot if left in the sun. Prophecy is not a tent to crouch under when it rains. If you fall... If I fall, Riffe said, too brisk, I have not yet made the choice I was told would be brought to me in a white gown. It's not my time to die. She saw their faces and snorted at herself. That is not a plan. That is an excuse. Let us not excuse stupidity with prophecy. A brief flash of teeth. But let us also not wait for the world to become kinder on our behalf. They made a harness out of the tack of Marius's lost horse. Raina's shoulders remembered Riffe's weight with ease. Riffe relied on her legs in the stirrups of an adjusted horse saddle to hold her, because to reach out to touch the black, she needed to be without a tether. Marius looped a coil of line across Raina's breast, where, if the worst came, she might have one more thing to reach for before the ground met them. He cut 2 stout hobble-thongs to make later into cuffs. Do not overfly him, he said softly to Raina, looking away and hiding his concern with care. He chases. Give him a place to go that leads to me. They went. The forest had the grace to hold its breath. Marius built a corridor out of air. Nothing a man could point to, everything a wing could feel. Raina took it as if it were a gift from a friend you did not have the energy to thank properly. The black hung over his familiar cut in the trees, grief making him ugly, as ever. Now, Raina said into the corner of Riffe's jaw, and slid. The first pass failed because fear has quicker reflexes than civility. The second almost did for them. A claw wrote a tidy line along Raina's flank that burned and would look dramatic and mean nothing. The third pass, because sometimes perseverance is all you deserve, brought Riffe's hand onto scale. The world made a sound like iron cooling. Heat ran out of the black as if someone had uncorked it. Colour collapsed in on itself. The body that had never learned how to be its size took a breath it could own. Scales became skin too quickly and with no kindness. The wings disappeared the way a dream goes when someone says your name wrong. What Raina held next was a man with breath like old ash, weight like an apology, and muscles that did not yet remember gravity belonged to them. He struggled in the pure animal way of someone pulled out of water by strangers and offended at not drowning on his own terms. Riffe kept her hand where it had to be a heartbeat longer because mercy sometimes looks like cruelty from the outside. Back, she said to the part of him that still had claws, and the part that still had claws obeyed. Then gravity remembered them all. Raina's harness had never been designed for this. The shifted weight tore the cinch a finger's width. The man in Raina's arms flailed with the insulted strength of drowning, and she was too busy holding him to notice the falling Riffe before it was too late. She locked her arms and kept the desperate man knowing that Riffe would not forgive losing focus, making her fall into futile folly. The world came to meet Riffe in ways that were decidedly neither forgiving nor friendly. "Riffe!" Marius shouted from below, already trying to make the fall softer by commanding air itself. It did not work. Wind stopped obeying him when it came close to Riffe, so he simply convinced the branches to move just right to break her fall a little without adding to hurt. Riffe did not scream. She went down through the higher branches like a thing that had negotiated poorly with gods, and then hit 3 steps toward kindness, because Marius had been busy clearing enough limbs into not being where they would do most good. The last 15 feet were an argument between branch and bone. Then Riffe met ground. White exploded behind her eyes. Then the white arranged itself into points of view, her shoulder blazing, her ribs a choir of objections. Her leg, or perhaps her hip, she could not tell, was in a private conversation with solid stone. She lay there and discovered that the body can breathe through more than she had believed. "I am not dead," she told the leaves, insulted. It came out as a sound only her mouth believed. Do not excuse stupidity with prophecy, she remembered, and she had the decency to almost laugh, but her ribs responded with a firm refusal. Raina landed because she had to. There is nothing dignified about bringing your bleeding flank down in a clearing bordered by trees that have opinions, but there is such a thing as success that is below pride's notice. She hit the char and rolled because Eliza had taught her, rolling is what saves you when nothing elegant will. The man fought her, and then fought the rope, and then fought air because air had always been treacherous to him. Raina tied what she had cut from hobbles into cuffs, fast and without apologies. She looped the line Marius had slung across her breast around a boulder and made the man into an argument with the rock that only the former would win. "Marius!" she shouted raw, but Marius was already gone to Riffe. He found Riffe by the way the ground had decided to be sorry. He could not make a cushion where she lay. The air went quiet and obedient in that peculiar way it had around her, and refused to be clever. So he was careful instead. He breathed a path clear of spiteful twigs. "Do not move," he said, and then found the nonsense of the instruction and added, "Breathe as if you intend to keep doing it." Plan worked, Riffe managed. Mostly. Mostly, he agreed, which is the kind of word a careful man uses to keep from swearing in the presence of injury. He made a sling of his cloak for her arm. He pressed her ribs to keep them from deciding they could be two places at once. He could not use wind to lift her, so he used it to ask Bracken to lie down and let him pass. He slid his arms under her with reverence and lifted her carefully. They came into camp, like a parable no one would choose to hear. A girl broken into pieces you could still recognize, a boy with his mouth set the way men set it when what they are carrying might fly away for good. And Raina on her knees beside a rope-bitten, furious man who had once been a dragon and would be still if rope, patience, and a bad plan turned out, as well as could be expected, did not intervene. Riffe caught one look at the man's face and, through the pain, discovered she was still the person she had been yesterday, convinced that despite the cost, it needed to be done. "If he bites you," she said to Raina conversationally, "I will stand up out of spite and pull his teeth one by one with the spoon." Raina's breath hitched into a noise that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. "I have him," she said. Marius put Riffe down as if the earth had earned the right to receive her, and did not let go until he was sure it would not drop her. Then he went to look the man in the eyes with the implacable politeness he saved for storms and princes. "Good evening," he said to the feral human shape their folly had purchased. "You will be saved whether you want to or not. The price has already been paid. I will not allow it be wasted." The man's answer was made of hoarse syllables that might one day remember how to be words. Raina, bleeding and bright, settled to keep vigil, because sometimes the only magic in the world is keeping watch while a rope does its work, and a friend breathes through pain nearby, and the night decides to be on your side without needing to be asked. Chapter 4. Leash and Lesson. Marius was the only one who could ride. That was the simple arithmetic of it. At first light he set his palm to Raina's shoulder, and then to Riffe's uninjured hand in the old household benediction that meant "be here when I get back," then swung up and was gone. The forest took him without fuss. He left behind a shaped wind, nothing dramatic, only a hush that would keep smoke climbing and noses disinterested. Raina watched the green swallow horse and man, and then did the only thing she could. She worked. Her own leg, gored where a claw had written its quick, disrespectful signature, got a rinse first. Cold water, then warm. She swore softly at the sting and grinned at herself for deserving it. Then she went to Riffe. The parcel of bandage and tallow the innkeep had paid to a knight found its purpose. Ryaner's hands had changed lately, hardened by honest work, no longer soft like someone raised like nobility. She bandaged Riffe best she could. Splint for the arm, binding for ribs, a proper unhandsome knot for the leg that had made its enemy in a rock. Riffe's face whitened and pinked and whitened again, but her mouth found its old apprenticeship in dry humour. "If you do this poorly," she said between teeth, "I will never forgive you for saving my life." Rhaina snorted. "I was trying for adequacy," she said, and tucked the last tail with a neatness that made the linen think well of her. The man, because he was a man now in shape even if not yet in comportment, watched. At first he watched the way wolves watch, every muscle taut, ready to spring. Then, as warm water and a cloth went over his own skin, face, neck, hands, then further with the practical modesty one extends to the sick and the drunk, something unhitched behind his eyes. Clean has its own theology. Filth tells a body it is a beast. Soap tells it a different story. He submitted, awkwardly, every motion either too fast or too cautious. When she poured another cup of water and worked it through his hair with her fingers, he closed his eyes like a child remembering a mother he claimed not to need. When she wiped old ash from the hollow behind his ear, he leaned hardly at all into the cloth, and then away as if embarrassed at being comforted by a stranger. Rhaina tied him loosely on a longer tether this time. When she turned back to Riffe's ribs, he came closer, silent as a thought. He crouched, head at a tilt, mouth puzzled. He looked from the strip of linen to Rhaina's hands to Riffe's breath and back again, the way men look at a carpenter's joint they cannot name but recognise as correct. "Your Highness," he said suddenly, voice raw. The words came out wrong, like boots on the wrong feet. He said it looking curiously at the face of Riffe. Rhaina and Riffe both froze in the ridiculous stillness, startled in equal measure by the fact that the man had used words and by what he said. Riffe lifted one brow in an expression that would have withered a captain and failed to make a dent in this man's confusion. "Not likely," she managed, and then, because pain makes honesty rude, "but I will take the promotion if it comes with soft bed." Rhaina touched his hand lightly. Not to correct, to soothe the shame that follows a mouth when it says what the mind has not signed for. "Riffe," she said slowly, then pointing. "Riffe." He frowned, then nodded a fraction as if filing the sound. She tried Rhaina, patting herself, and he glanced at her, obedient to the shape of the air. "Rhaina?" he echoed softly, and the syllables sat in his mouth like a thing that might learn to be home. They made a collar because sense wanted a hand on the world. It was not pretty. A cut hobblethong, doubled and softened with tallow. 2 holes burned through with a hot tent peg. A loop of rope that ran to a ring on Rhaina's belt. Not a chain. Not a prison. A jess, like a falcon's. Permission to be fierce near a hand that meant well. The first time the line tightened, he flinched as if expecting pain, and then stood the test like a dog who has just constructed for himself the idea of leash, and decided it need not be an enemy. He lay near Rhaina's knee after that, eyes half-lidded, the attentive calm of a guard dog learning the geography of his yard. Let a twig snap wrong and he was up, stare cold as iron. Let Riffe groan and he went still again. By midday, Rhaina had succumbed to the exquisite exhaustion of doing 3 impossible things. She ate in the practical way of the very tired, with gratitude and poor taste. The man took food only when she put it in his hand and showed what to do with it first. Bread was understood at once. Dried apple confounded him until the sweetness convinced him that teeth had been designed for this too. Toward afternoon, when the green began to stretch and show its bones, the wind sent her a message in Marius's manner. Nearly there. She stood, winced, and stood anyway. The healer came with Marius as healers ought, with a bag that smelled of spirits and clean cloth, and eyes that had learned the shapes of trouble without falling in love with them. He was not old. He was at the age where a man's hands are still learning strength and have already memorized gentleness. He took in the collar first and made the small approving noise that says, a thing is sensible even when the world does not like it. Good, he said simply. Better to insult pride than to let madness loose. He knelt by Riffe, his face arranging itself into the professional's neutral that makes it possible to say the words the body is braced to reject. He pressed, listened to the rib's reply, cut her bandage, and retied it flatter. Set the arm in a truer line with 2 cudgels he shaved to purpose, with a knife so sharp it would have made a soldier weep for envy. He smelled her breath for blood as a smith smells iron for carbon. He pulled the rock out of her calf that had made itself a guest and introduced it to the light. He mixed a paste of comfrey leaf and crushed yarrow and honey, laid it on, and spoke to it as if it were a stubborn apprentice. The healer gave Riffe instructions in the tone one uses for a person who has forgotten how to be a person, while looking more at Marius than Riffe herself. Breathe slow. Do not laugh. Do not cough. Do not move more than you must until second full moon. Then move carefully, even if it hurts a little. When bone has healed, body needs to relearn movement. Marius nodded, taking notes in the margins of his ledger, face more grim and determined than Riffe had seen before. Then the healer looked at Rayna's gash and made a face that was not quite a laugh. Dragon scratches are indecent, he said, clean, rude, and proud of themselves. He cleaned it again anyway because healers are more stubborn than pride, laid a line of resin salve and bound it with a strip that would not stick where it should not. Only then did he turn to the man. He did not reach. He sat 6 feet away and looked. The man looked back and did not bare teeth, which was a victory worth a nod. The healer put his hands out, palms up, so a creature could see there was nothing hidden. He glanced at the collar and then at Rayna. You made it, he said approvingly, not as a compliment but as exact notation. Keep it, and keep it on him. He set out various herbs as one would for teaching, not for spectacle. These help the man remember himself, he said. They will not make him human. That is a matter of practice. Rayna's mouth tightened. Practice, she said lightly, as one says I have been learning to fly in a thicket, is something we know all about. The healer smiled without teeth. The beast will return, Marius said with the confidence of knowing. Yes, the healer said, if you are planning to put him in the path of his old shape before he has learned to breathe inside the new, tell me, and I will make sure someone buries what is left of you. Riffe stirred and managed something between a grimace and a smile. We are not that stupid, she said hoarsely. Then, after a beat, honesty set its jaw. Not again. The healer snorted. Good. The man had watched the entire exchange without choosing a side, eyes flicking from mouth to hands to the steam from the little pot, as if each were a piece of a map he had once known how to read. When the healer slid the cup across the ground toward him, low, no sudden moves, he sniffed it, made a face at the bitterness, and looked at Rayna as if to ask if this too belonged in the category of things that would not kill him. She nodded. He drank obediently, and made a performance of hating it loudly enough to make even Riffe amused through her pain. By dark the camp was a little civilization again. The horses rested without flinching when the man moved. Riffe slept the sleep of the defeated righteous, shallow but sufficient. Marius wrote a single line in the ledger, healer, fair, paid in coin and gratitude, and then lay with his cloak over his shoulders. Rayna kept watch. The man lay with his head near her knee, eyes half closed, the line slack. When a night noise tried to be important, he raised his head and did not growl. Good, she said softly to no one in particular. We will teach you to be one thing and the other, and then both. She petted the man as if he was a dog, and after moments' hesitation, he yielded to the touch and settled back against her knee. From the edge of sleep, Riffe muttered, "And we will try not to be stupid while we do it." "Trying," Reiner agreed, and tightened her hand on the leash not as prison, but as promise. The night agreed to be simple for a change, because the fire in the sky was now a tired man leaning on someone's knee. For the others at least it was peace at last, but not for Marius. As soon as he closed his eyes, he would see Riffe falling again and would be jolted violently awake by the dread it had awakened in him. His hand had crept quietly toward Riffe's by the fire like a thief in the night, and sleep only came when there was reassuring warmth held in it.